Syria and the conundrums of human freedom. Welcome, Swagatham, Vanakkam. It's great to attain freedom. It's very exciting and euphoric to emerge from the prisons of unfreedom, punctuated with fear, uncertainty, quivering with human suffering, avoidable degradation, destitution, and inflicted disabilities of diverse kinds. It's a wonderful thing to attain freedom. But it is naive to assume that the agenda is over with the overthrow of the tyrant. The mere departure of the tyrant, the mere elimination of the tyrant, does not mean the realization of freedom. Perhaps a far more important agenda than overthrowing the tyrant, breaking the shackles of slavery, political slavery, is growing into the discipline of freedom, growing into the mature understanding and sensible practice or exercise of freedom. Unfortunately, people do not realize the crucial importance of the second aspect, in spite of the fact that the history of humankind over the last several millennia has been witnessing, has been loudly proclaiming, crying out, if you like, about the importance of the second aspect that I am trying to underline here. In my view, even more important than the agenda of driving away the tyrant or eliminating the tyrant is the agenda of growing into a mature understanding and practice of freedom. What is freedom for? What is real freedom? Why is freedom so important for human beings? There must be a logic to this. And the purpose of freedom needs to be understood and taken good advantage of or put to proper use if we are to be really free. Or to put it rather simply and directly, freedom from is never complete without freedom for. We are free from this tyrant, but free for what? If we are not clear about the for part, the freedom for part, then we will regress to the old state of unfreedom. We'll create our own structures of unfreedom. After all, if you look at the global scenario today, far more people are living in situations of political oppression today than was the case 20 years ago. And all this has happened by people freely exercising their freedom of choice, their franchise. It's by exercising our freedom to choose that we undermine our freedom. And it was taking into account this paradoxical aspect that one of the most stimulating writers of the 20th century, Arthur Koestler, said, and this about Hitler. He said Hitler used perfectly legitimate democracy, perfectly legitimate processes of democracy to murder democracy. He made people freely choose unfreedom, oppression, and their own destruction. This is a grim reality. It's a reality that erupted in a very grim fashion in the history of India. In the wake of the attainment of freedom, freedom that the people of India have been dreaming of, longing of, praying for, what happened? There was a massive outbreak of communal riots. the true scale of which is truly mind-boggling. It's always a dangerous thing to assume that once the tyrant is driven out, the people will automatically know what freedom is and how to exercise it. A people inured to unfreedom are people who have been conditioned in situations of slavery for a long period of time, and therefore whose nature is denatured, needs to be carefully nurtured and trained in the nursery of freedom to understand what it is, what its responsibilities are, and what its essential disciplines are, so that its exercise remains beneficial and life affirming rather than life destroying, life corrupting. In this context, I am reminded of a very stimulating Jewish thinker, Martin Buber, who said that the French Revolution gave us three stirring slogans: liberty, equality, fraternity. He said liberty traveled westwards and made America its home, and soon degenerated into debauchery, which undermined the very dignity of life. The same liberty traveled eastwards and made Eastern Europe its home and created the faceless collectivity wherein individualism, including the rights of individuals, were all crushed under the iron heel. So these are grim realities that we need to be aware of. Today, Syria, in the wake of the sudden departure of the Assad regime, the collapse of the Assad regime, and the erstwhile president fleeing from the country and seeking refuge in Russia, is in the throes of this historical reality that I'm trying to punctuate. The real struggle begins now. And that struggle is going to be particularly complicated in the case of Syria, because a motley crowd of erstwhile resistance forces have captured pockets of control, as of now, virtually balkanizing Syria. The situation could change, and I hope it changes, but as of now, Syria is not one unified country where free people live. Different factions are controlling different patches of Syria. And whether or not the people who are now assuming charge of Syria's destiny will succeed in handling this challenge and in creating a united Syria, which will then address the issue of rebuilding itself virtually from its ruins, is something we'll have to wait and see. If this doesn't happen, the alternative is far too dangerous, far too intimidating, far too sinister to contemplate. Now, in this context, I would like us to consider our own predicament, whether in this country, where in India, we are sufficiently mindful of the need to be educated in the fundamentals of freedom. Because if you don't understand and practice freedom aright, we will use freedom to abolish freedom. History is a one long narrative of one people after the other, using their freedom in order to destroy the freedom of others. And one major aspect or major manifestation of this is empire building. Whether it be the great Alexandrian Empire, built by Alexander the Great, the Roman Empire, the British Empire, and various other empires, it may be of interest to my viewers to know that the rationalization, the justification offered for this imperial adventure to subjugate other people so that the writ of one people and one nation runs over the rest, has always been justified by saying that this will secure the unity of mankind, this will unite the human family, humankind, and will also secure peace. In other words, if you really analyze that doctrine to its essential principles, what it is saying is that the world can be at peace only if the freedom of a large majority of the people is compromised. This is the wisdom of the world. Keep the people subjugated. Now, for example, in the Arab nations, I'm not saying this in a prejudicial manner. The unwritten assumption is that the people are unfit for democracy. They have to be ruled with an iron fist. Consider Iraq, for example. Under the dictatorship of Saddam Hussein, Iraq did pretty well. Certainly it did better than its present situation. Is Iraq ready for democracy? Is democracy hale and hearty in Iraq? Well, on that question, the jury is still out, and your opinion, your judgment is better than mine. Are the people of Iran mature enough to gain and exercise their freedom and right? Why is it that democracy is a bad word in many Arab countries, South American countries? These are questions that we need to ask. It is wrong and naive to assume that a people will be immediately, overnight, automatically be ready for freedom. It's also very naive and unrealistic to assume that people actually welcome freedom. As psychologists have alerted us today, and have been alerting us over the last century and a half in particular, that human beings are as much afraid of freedom as they are desirous of attaining it. In this context, I would like to refer you to that very interesting book by the American author Erich Fromm, ERICH-FROMM, Escape from Freedom. Escape from Freedom. His fundamental thesis there is that for many people in this world, freedom is a burden and they would like to flee from it. He was not the first to say so. Before him, a great novelist like Dostoevsky said that human beings are tormented by their freedom because freedom means responsibility and people are not ready to shoulder responsibilities. The same idea has been repeated again and again by the existential philosophers of the 20th century, most of them based in France, though not entirely in France. One of the forerunners of the existential philosophy movement was Soren Kierkegaard, and on the literature side it was Dostoevsky. But people like people like Malraux, Jean-Paul Sartre, Albert Camus, they're all French authors. And you have Kafka, Franz Kafka, not France, but Hungary. So you have this spread. Now all of them feel, and all of them have stated up front, that it is naive to take freedom for granted. So psychologists say the same thing, men of literature say the same thing, philosophers say the same thing, sociologists say the same thing. Now, India, in my opinion, has neglected from 1947. I'm not blaming a particular party or a particular government, but from 1947, India committed the mistake of taking freedom for granted. We never really trained people for freedom. Therefore, the great vision that the fighters for freedom, the great architects of Indian freedom, particularly Gandhi and Jawaharlal Nehru, had, their vision. Remember the stirring speech that Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru made on the eve of freedom, or attaining our independence? That every tear will be wiped from the face of all Indians. Has that vision been fulfilled? Well, the less said about it, the better. So, the real agenda must begin after the tyrant has departed, or after the breaking of the shackles of unfreedom. They have to grow in the understanding and practice of freedom. And in that, this is the most important thing I have to say. In that, I'm convinced, absolutely convinced, even as a secular thinker, I'm absolutely convinced that the most crucial factor is a spiritual understanding of freedom. To me, fundamentally, freedom is a spiritual state. Freedom is God's gift to human beings. It's not something invented by petty politicians and the small tyrants that come and go on the stage of history. Freedom is God's gift to human beings. It's something spiritual. But the idea of spirituality must be understood in a comprehensive and holistic sense. So spiritual freedom also includes political freedom, social freedom, cultural freedom, religious freedom, economic freedom, etc. All freedoms together. So from a spiritual perspective, nothing can be excluded, because spirituality is an all-embracing and integrated vision of human condition and the realities therein. So, in this context, if you have a spiritual vision of freedom, you'll realize fundamentally, as a starting point, that your freedom is real, meaningful, and secure only if you also respect the freedom of others. Hence the teaching, do to others what you would that they should do to you. And Gandhi understood it, and therefore he said that India will not be free until the last Indian is liberated. A vision that, as we all know, Bhimrao Ambedkar, the main architect of Indian Constitution, also said. But then Ambedkar was heartbroken about the deep-rooted, ineradicable inequality in the Indian society, and therefore, in an interview with BBC, I think in 1953 or 54, he said that he feared that democracy would be a failed experiment in India. I pray to God that this may not be the case, and that this doomsday prophecy of Ambedkar may not be fulfilled, that democracy would be safe. But there are serious challenges to which we cannot shut our eyes. So, what's happening, what's unfolding in Syria, and my heart goes out to the people of Syria, the long-suffering people of Syria. Suffering for what? You must understand. Who is a gainer from all of this? The Assad family? Look at them. They cannot set foot in their own homeland. That's what they have achieved. And the many collaborators with this regime of oppression, today they are living in terror. And many of them have fled already. This is all that people achieve by abusing their freedom. At the individual level, for example, a person abuses freedom, a young person, mainly young people, but not entirely like young people, these days abuse their freedom by taking psychedelic drugs, and they get addicted to it. Addiction is a state of unfreedom. And I've written a book on addiction. It's called Dream and the Dragon. And I think the very opening paragraph, in the opening paragraph I state that addiction is a dramatization of the conundrum of human freedom. That is to say, you need to be free to be addicted. Once you're addicted, you lose your freedom entirely. So you're using your freedom to kill your freedom altogether. That's what human beings do. And there are various forms in which human beings embrace slavery, even in relationships, in places of work, in religion, in politics. Everywhere, human beings embrace slavery. And something that, say, Rousseau in his own ways long ago intuited. He said, man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains. But what we need to realize is that many of these chains are manufactured by oneself. They are self-inflicted manacles. And what that at the individual level is also true at the collective level, the micro level and the macro level. And what you're seeing in Syria today is the illustration of the principle at the macro level. And what is unfolding in India needs to be understood in this light. Therefore, as Indians, we must very clearly and closely watch what's happening in Syria, how Syrians who now have entered a world of freedom will handle or manage their freedom. Will they succeed in this grand experiment, or will they collapse? Will Syria lapse into anarchy and chaos, or will the people of Syria inherit a new world? In the words of the last book in the Bible, the book of Revelation, a new heaven and a new earth. That's what freedom is for. But unless and until you understand freedom aright and exercise it aright in a spiritual, godly manner, in a positive, affirming, life-affirming manner, the consequences could be unthinkable, too sinister, too terrible, too menacing to contemplate. Well, I wish the people of Syria all the very best. But then Syria is a case study in this terrible ambivalence that rules the nature of human beings. The ambivalence by which we love and hate freedom. We seek and run away from freedom. And we use our freedom to undermine our freedom as well as the freedom of others. At least let us ensure that our freedom and the way we use our freedom does not cause hindrances, headaches, nuisance to others. Let us be healthy, sensible, responsible custodians of freedom.